9 a.m. in Beijing, where China's most important political gathering, the National People's Congress, is underway. Premier Li Qiang set to deliver a speech outlining key economic goals and policies. That work report did come through here in just the last couple of minutes. And there you go. You do see President Xi sitting down there waiting for that speech. But yes, softening that growth target to 4.5% to 5%, the most modest growth target in more than 3 decades.
Yeah, we're getting really the outline of the targets for the year. We're still getting more, in fact, headlines coming through that markets will really be pouring over as we go into the open and as, of course, we wait for the premier to really come on and deliver that speech and really give us sort of the broader context of all these targets taking place, everything from your macro targets to how the individual departments are going. The NDRC is talking about all these things that matter to markets, right? Whether that's anti-involution, overcapacity in the steel sector, and what they're going to do as far as those specific priorities are concerned.
And that growth target downgrade, I think it was widely expected that it was going to be somewhat of a lower range, and really kind of the first downgrade we've seen since 2023. But when it comes to these sort of statements, it carries a bit more weight. It's not just about an economic target. It also has a bit of political sort of statement here on where the economy is going. And really, they're starting to see that this whole old growth model of investment, property is really starting to falter. So, there's going to be more significance on the whole rebalancing of the whole economy, more towards consumption. We did get some lines, but I have to say, not too much details as of yet on really how to boost the consumption side of things, too.
Yeah, we'll get into all of the lines in a moment here, because this is also taking place against the backdrop of 2 related parallel stories across the world. One is a global equity market that is rebounding quite substantially right now, and juxtaposed really against the turmoil taking place in the Middle East right now. So everything is coming together, and as far as what the market reaction to this will be and has been so far as it pertains to events in the Middle East. In fact, when you have a look at where we are as far as markets go, we are seeing a bounce of about 3.5% across the Asia-Pacific benchmark. A lot of that has to do with, of course, this bounce we're seeing in Taiwan at the open. Next, coming up on your screens, also with the bounce we're seeing on the Kospi index and Korean stocks, where you had the likes of Samsung and SK Hynix following the biggest one-day drop on record. We are up 12% on that index today. Still, the pain point, though, as it pertains to markets, is really in bonds, where you have this yield pickup still. The inflation story remains a question mark, and whether or not we should and can look through the supply side shock that will probably show up. As you can see on the left side of your screens, the premier has just stood up from his seat on his way to the stage to deliver that. We'll bring you that speech once he begins. Very quickly, though, gold futures coming up. Brent is where we are. And it's worth pointing out, when you look at Brent prices, we're up about 17% from last week. In terms of Shanghai crude, the energy prices in China in renminbi are actually up 40%. That's coming up on your screens. A50 futures and the currency markets are also coming up. And there we go. The premier, of course, is set to begin his speech. And against the backdrop of a market that is rebounding, stabilizing. But so far, that's the only place we're seeing that. Unfortunately, the same cannot be said about the situation still taking place in the Middle East.
Yeah, where we continue to see, the clashes, continuing here when you talk about that U.S. Submarine that attacked when it comes to this Iranian submarine, I should say. And certainly there's a lot of questions about that Iranian warship in international waters and what this means, right? It seems like this war is widening in some ways and still no end in sight. When it comes to really what we're seeing in the MPC, we'll get to the latest when it comes to what Li Qiang is saying. But joining us now from Beijing is David Daokui Li. He's a director at Tsinghua University and a former advisor to the PBOC. David, I'm sure you've been able to see this work report. Obviously, the big headline is the growth target here, softening to a range of 4.5% to 5%. Does that make sense to you, and what is the signal?
Well, it makes sense because it reflects 2 things. Number one, top decision makers realize that we are in a very turbulent times, and it is most important for the Chinese economy to stay put, to stay stable, okay, rather than to pursue a very rapid rebalance, okay. So stability is job number one. Number two is that the top decision makers realize it is not the real GDP growth rate that matters. It is the nominal GDP rate, that is the real GDP growth plus inflation, plus CPI. So today's target is CPI 2%. If the 2% can be realized as opposed to 0% over the past few years, then we will see a Chinese economy growing at 6.5 to 7.5 nominal rate. That would be great improvement over the previous years.
David here. I want to pick up on that point. That's important because one of our guests this week also highlighted the fact that the target should be nominal, not real. I think that the follow-up question there would be, how confident can the markets be that we do get from near 0 to 2% over the next 24 months?
Well, I think we've seen a light at the end of the tunnel because the real reason for the slow GDP, for slow CPI, is the slowing down of local government expenditure. Remember that local government expenditure is actually higher, or at least of the same magnitude of consumer expenditure. Okay, consumer spending. Consumer spending is less than 40% of GDP, and the local government spends around 40% of GDP. So what's slowing down the local government's expenditure is local debt. And this is a key area this government report will talk about. It will continue issuing special central government debt to swap out local debt. I think that's the right direction. However, I think more higher intensity, more magnitude, higher magnitude, more debt will be issued this year, and if necessary, more will be planned, will be issued than what the report is now planning on.
They have, in fact, already outlined, to your point, that's correct, what they plan to do as far as the financing mix is concerned. David, before we headed straight back and listen into the speech of the Premier, which I believe right now he's recapping what the economy's done over the last 12 months, is there any specific part of this work report speech that we're about to show that you think a global audience should be paying most attention to specifically?
I think that's the overall attitude, overall mentality, a change, the overall mentality. The overall change is that let's talk about the real economic growth. That is, real, but not the economic sense, okay? I'm talking about the real impact of the economic growth. Let's focusing on the demand side. Let's focusing on public expenditure. Let's focusing on welfare, so that at the end of this year, the whatever number, 4.7, 4.85%, will be more meaningful, will be more fruitful for the participants, the investors and the consumers of the economy. So let's look at something real, not just flashing numbers. Okay, that's, I think, the change in the mentality and in the attitude. That investors should pay attention to.
Yes, as you say, looking for those sustainable growth drivers there. Li Daokui, let's hold that thought and let's now start listening to what Li Qiang, the Premier, has to say. Let's take a listen.
4% and 9.2% respectively. While the output of industrial robots and integrated circuits rose by 28% and 10.9% respectively. New energy vehicle output exceeded 16 million units. And the number of electric vehicle charging facilities topped 20 million. A drop of 5.1% in energy consumption per unit of GDP continued to improve. What we achieved in 2025 was indeed hard-won. Rarely in many years have we encountered such a grave and complex landscape where external shocks and challenges were intertwined with domestic difficulties and tough policy choices. The Party Central Committee with Comrade Xi Jinping as core led us in meeting these challenges with the pressing ahead with fortitude and composure. We firmly safeguard China's national interest on the international front. On the domestic front, we focus on running our own affairs well. We prepared for the worst-case scenario, striving for the best. Not only did we maintain overall macroeconomic stability and secure new advances in high-quality development, but we also significantly bolstered morale and confidence across society. During this process, we deepen our understanding of what is needed to deliver in economic work under new circumstances. We must fully tap the potential of the economy, both provide policy support and pursue reform and innovation. Both foster market vitality and conduct effective regulation, invest in both physical assets and people, and hone our own capabilities to navigate external challenges. Once again, it has been shown that upholding the centralized, unified leadership of the Party Central Committee is the fundamental guarantee for overcoming all difficulties and advancing all of our work. It has been shown that the Chinese people possess the confidence, wisdom, and strength to surmount any obstacle that lies ahead. Last year, we continued to enrich our understanding of and apply Xi Jinping's thought on socialism with Chinese characteristics for a new era. We also fully applied the guiding principle from the 20th CPC National Congress and the plenary sessions of the 20th CPC Central Committee. Acting on the decisions and plans of the Party Central Committee, we mainly did the following work. First, we implemented more proactive and effective macro policies and worked to maintain stable economic performance. Early in the year, we took all necessary steps to prepare for emerging complex and volatile situation. In the first quarter, China economy got off to a good start. From the second quarter on, in response to new development facing the economy, particularly the impact of U.S. tariff hikes, we fully leveraged policies already in place and introduced a range of more robust measures to maintain employment and economic stability. These steps effectively cushioned downward economic pressure and ensured the fulfillment of major objectives for the year. We'll pursue a more proactive fiscal policy and appropriately accommodative monetary policy. Government spending was increased. We also lowered the policy interest rates and the RRR. Consumer goods trading programs were ramped up, resulting in over 2.6 trillion yuan in commodity sales. Total retail sales of consumer goods topped 50 trillion yuan. To boost effective investment, we stepped up efforts to implement two major projects. Funding for equipment upgrades were allocated and put to use more quickly, driving an 11.8% increase in investment in equipment purchases. New types of policy-backed financial instruments were introduced to guarantee the development of the realistic market. Thanks to the coordinated measures, we diffuse risks in small, medium, local financial institutions, help them to deliver the result of these policies. Second, we pursued innovation-driven development and continued to build a modernized industrial system. We implemented strategic plans for building China's strengths in science and technology. Last year, China's R&D spending reached 2.8% of GDP, and the value of technology contract transactions rose by 10.8%. The integration of technological and industrial innovation picked up pace. Transformation and upgrading of traditional industry continued, And the AI Plus initiative continued to strive. AI industrial application gather pace, and the value added of core digital economy industries exceeded 10.5% of GDP. Third, we further deepened reform and opening up and ensured smooth flows in the national economy. We took solid steps to implement the reform plans adopted at the third plenary session of the 20 CPC Central Committee. We implemented the guidelines on developing a unified national market, issued an updated negative list for market access, and we also gained active results in the reform of SOEs. We also introduced measures to boost the private investment. Overdue payments owed to enterprises were settled. We took the initiative to open China wider and also advanced unilateral opening up in a well-ordered way. Exports for the year grew by 6.1%. Thanks to a new initiative launched to keep foreign investment stable, we have seen good progress, and island-wide special custom operations were launched in the Hainan Free Trade Port. Solid steps were taken to advance high-quality Belt and Road cooperation, further boosting practical cooperation in various fields. Fourth, we moved forward with both new urbanization and all-round rural revitalization, and promoted coordinated development between urban and rural areas and between different regions. In implementing the plan set out at last year's Central Urban Work Conference, we foster modern metropolitan areas and also advance the people moving to cities from rural areas to grant them the permanent urban residency, and the share of permanent urban residents in the total population rose to 67.9%. And we also further consolidate, expand poverty alleviation gains and bring them integrated with the rural revitalization. The number of employed people across those lifted out of poverty remain at above 30 million. We intensified implementation of regional strategy and enhanced interconnected development among different regions. Fifth, we ensured the people's well-being and actively developed social programs. We adopted a new supportive policy to stabilize employment. We ensured stable employment for key groups. We advanced the 3-year action plan for boosting China's strength in education, and also continue to advance development of the community-level schools. And the medical service were improved and covered all the grade 2 and grade 3 public general hospitals in the county level. And we see that the minimum basic old age benefits for rural and non-working urban residents were increased by 20 yuan per month. The private pension system were implemented nationwide. And we delivered more extensive and effective social assistance. Cultural program industry were boosted. Domestic tourist trips increased by 16.2%, and inbound tourist trips by 17.1%. We successfly hosted the 9th Asian Winter Games and the 15th National Games. We also witnessed a strong surge in recreational sports events and public fitness activities. 6. We worked faster to build a beautiful China and advance the green and low carbon development. We took solid measures to improve both the quality and efficacy of air pollution prevention and control. In cities at and above the prefecture level, the average concentration of fine particulate matter fell by 4.4%. Efforts to conserve major rivers, important lakes, and reservoirs were intensified. And the initiative was launched to build the green and low carbon transition in key industries. In total energy consumption, the share of non-fossil energy reached 21.7%. China announced its 2035 nationally determined contributions to respond to climate change, demonstrating our commitment as a responsible major country.
7. We continue to enhance government performance and develop new and better approaches to social governance. We implemented the party committee's strategic plans for conducting full and rigorous party self-governance, launched a study campaign for fully implementing the 8-point decision on improving work conduct and strengthen efforts to improve party conduct, build integrity, and combat corruption. We also addressed pointless formalities to lighten the burden on those working on the ground. We continue to build a law-based government. We submitted 13 legislative proposals to the Standing Committee of the NPC, and we also accepted oversight in compliance with the law and handled with careful attention. We also launched a special campaign on regulating enterprise-related administrative law enforcement. We refined the mechanism for ensuring regular headways on key patterns in the delivery of one-stop government services, and the 3-year action plan to address the root causes of workplace accidents and ensure production safety was carried out. And we also take active measures to crack down on illegal and criminal activities of all types in accordance with the law. And all this has led to further progress in advancing the Peaceful China initiative. In 2025, we made new advances in conducting major country diplomacy with Chinese characteristics. President Xi and other party and state leaders visited many countries and attended a host of major bilateral and multilateral events, including the China Central Asia Summit, the 32nd APEC Economic Leaders Meeting, the Virtual BRICS Summit, and the Chinese G20 Summit. China also hosted several major diplomatic events, such as the SCO Tianjin Summit, the Global Leaders Meeting on Women, and the Fourth Ministerial Meeting of the China Select Forum. We remained firm in opposing protectionism and unilateral bullying acts, in upholding multilateralism, openness, and cooperation. China proposed the Global Governance Initiative and continued to promote the building of a community with a shared future for mankind, and played a positive and constructive role in addressing global challenges and resolving regional and international hotspot issues. With these efforts, China made important contributions to global peace and development. 2025 marked the conclusion of the 14th five-year plan. Over the past 5 years, the CPC Central Committee with Comrade Xi Jinping at its core has rallied the people of all ethnic groups across the country and led us in responding to the once-in-a-century COVID-19 pandemic and other extraordinary shocks and challenges, and in securing major achievements in the cause of the party and the country. And this has ensured a good beginning for our journey towards the second centenary goal. China's economy reached new heights. China's GDP crossed successive thresholds, topping 110, 120, 130, and 140 trillion yuan. We have registered an annual average growth of 5.4%, well above global average. New breakthroughs were achieved in technological and industrial innovation. R&D spending increased by an annual average of 10%. New strides were made in reform and opening up. We made solid gains in reforms and in progress of unified national market, and all access restrictions on foreign investment in manufacturing were lifted. People's well-being was elevated to a new high. Per capita disposable income increased at an average rate of 5.4%, and a total of over 60 million urban jobs were created. The average life expectancy reached 79.25 years. Fast progress was achieved in ecological conservation. In cities at and above prefecture level, the proportion of days with good or excellent air quality rose to 89.8%. 3%. China achieved the world's fastest and largest increase in forest resources and created the world's largest and fast-growing renewable energy system. China's ability to safeguard security has improved. Security capacity was bolstered considerably, and we held firm to the bottom line of not having any systemic risks. Thanks to arduous and unrelenting efforts, we have accomplished all 20 major targets, 17 major strategic targets, and 102 major projects set out in the outline of the 14th Five-Year Plan. Fundamentally, we owe these remarkable achievements to the CPC Central Committee with Comrade Xi Jinping at its core, which has been at the helm charting our course, and to Xi Jinping's thoughts on socialism with Chinese characteristics for a new era, which has provided us with sound guidance, and to the concerted efforts of the whole party, the entire military, and the Chinese people of all ethnic groups. On behalf of the State Council, I express my sincere thanks to all the people and to all other political parties, people's organizations, and public figures from all sectors of the society. I convey our heartfelt appreciation to our fellow countrymen and women in the Hong Kong and Macau special administrative regions in Taiwan and those residing overseas. I also extend our sincere appreciation to the governments of other countries, international organizations, and friends across the world that have shown understanding and support for us in China. While recognizing our achievements, we are also clear-eyed about the difficulties and challenges we face. The evolving external environment is exerting a greater impact on China, and geopolitical risks are rising. Global economic momentum remains sluggish, while multilateralism and free trade are under severe threat. At home, we still face quite a few problems and challenges, both old and new. In economic development and transformation, the task of transitioning to new growth drivers is formidable. Some enterprises are having difficulties running their business, and the government is having budgetary revenue issues. And there is still room for improvement in the work of the government. Some policies upon implementation have not delivered as expected. Some officials lack the ability and solutions needed to drive high-quality development. Some officials have a misguided understanding of what it means to perform well, and corruption still occurs frequently in some sectors and localities. While these difficulties are not to be ignored, we still have every reason to be firmly confident. The conditions underpinning China's long-term growth and its underlying trend remain unchanged. And China's advantages of political system and the fact that we are a major country are demonstrating, and we will surely open up even more promising prospects for China's development if we respond to these questions in the right way. Second, main objectives and major tasks for the 15th Five-Year Plan period. In accordance with the recommendations of the Party Committee for formulating the 15th Five-Year Plan period for national economic and social development, the State Council has drafted the outline of the 15th Five-Year Plan for national economic and social development, which has been submitted to this session for your review. I will now brief you on the major indicators and main objectives. We have drafted 20 main indicators covering several areas. In the area of economic development, we cover structure, growth, and efficiency. In the area of innovation, there are altogether 3 indicators. In the area of public well-being, we have proposed indicators covering employment, income, education, medical care, health, elderly care, and child care. Altogether, 7 indicators. in the area of public well-being, in the area of green and low-carbon development, in the fields of carbon reduction and pollutants control. There are altogether 5 indicators. In terms of security, there are indicators proposed in the fields of food and energy production capacity. With regards to major strategic tasks, the draft outline set out the major tasks in the following 4 areas. The first is pursuing high-quality development. We want to consolidate the foundations for economic development, centering on a modern industrial system with advanced manufacturing as the backbone. To achieve greater self-reliance and strength in science and technology, we must deliver advances in original innovation and breakthroughs in core technology. In the field of advancing the Beautiful China initiative, we will further refine our eco-environment. Second, strengthening the domestic economy. We must remain committed to exerting the inherent momentum of the domestic economy, and we will also focus on unleashing the great potential of China as a great manufacturer, and also build a unified national market, and also revitalize the initiatives of all the market players. We will also focus on dual circulation, make the most of all positive market elements.
Third, advancing common prosperity for all. We would like to build a childbirth-friendly society, improve population service, develop education that meets the people's expectation, raise the average years of schooling among the working-age population to 11.7, move faster to both advance the Healthy China initiative and build a country strong in sports, raise life expectancy to 80 years, proactively respond to population aging, and increase the share of nursing beds in elderly care facilities to 73%, promote high-quality full employment.
Chinese Premier Li Qiang there, continuing with his work report, and we're going to step back a little bit, just take a look at the market open in China here this morning to see if any sort of market reaction. You continue to see, China is joining in on this sort of bounce that we're seeing across Asia. Well, obviously, when it came to the growth target, it was downgraded, but certainly, people were expecting this, widely speaking, that 4% of GDP when it comes to the budget deficit, kept it the same here at record levels. So does that mean that sort of they're keeping the fiscal tap still open here? So we're still looking at what that may mean in terms of where spending could be. But yes, it seems like markets are, for now, taking it pretty well. We're up about 0.9% for the CSI 300. Shanghai Composite is getting closer to that 4,100 level. Still tracking the Iran sort of situation, and you still see crude markets are still quite elevated here this morning. We're still seeing 13% gains when it comes to crude in Shanghai. And as Dave mentioned, right, the moves that we're seeing across some of the mainland sort of oil futures are much bigger and much more magnified in some ways. Potentially maybe a lot of questions on what this means for China, given the exposure that they have to, of course, Iranian oil and the like. Take a look when it comes to the rest for bonds. Obviously, there's going to be a lot of question about, the amount of, debt issuance and the like. We talked about that 1.4 trillion when it comes to these ultra long bonds there that they will be issuing, 4.4 trillion when it comes to these special government bonds. Does this add that sort of supply risk? That certainly is going to be something that the long end of the yield curve is going to be dealing with as well. So far, taking it in stride. And really, when it comes to large caps, are doing quite well. Capricorn Tech is up 1.5%. CATL is also up more than 1% here. Consumption names like Medea Group are also catching a bid here this morning, which is interesting when they talk about increasing loans in the consumption space and whatnot. They did kind of cut a little bit in terms of the quotas of that trade-in program, which of course is also expected as well. So no surprises really so far in terms of the market is concerned. Hang Seng is looking like this. There you go. We're at 1% gains in that, and we're seeing HS Tech now back above that 4,900 level at least. Of course, we've been focusing on the tech space. Xiaomi is up some 2.7%. HSBC, we're seeing seeing a bit of a recovery in some of these big, large caps. Certainly we'll see, right? The fix today was 688. Well, right now the currency is at 688.16, so a bit more on the stronger side. So dollars come off a little bit. But also there was that PBOC fix that really did try to reiterate a stable currency during MPC as well. So that's at least is helping to keep the gains when it comes to the renminbi. In terms of what we're watching out for, oil stocks certainly in focus, just given the Iran situation. We talked about this, submarine that knocked down this Iran warship. We talked about how this could be widening to parts of Turkey and the like. So certainly there is still that going on. Oil stocks are doing this here right now in China. I'm guessing they're still following the oil price higher. No, they're actually heading lower here this morning. There you go. China Oilfield Services down some 3. Defense stocks obviously is the one where people said, defense is still kind of that bright spot given some of the geopolitical situation there. And we're seeing a mixed picture, but mostly higher this morning. And really those NDRC lines that we got earlier this morning about, fostering, the biotech industry, humanoid robots. It seems like those are actually helping as well, some of those sectors. Let's listen in more with Li Qiang.
Social harmony and stability. ODs will ensure we got off to a good start in the 15th five-year plan period. The main targets for development this year are as follows. GDP growth of 4.5 to 5%, while striving for better in practice. Surveyed urban unemployment rate of around 5.5%. Over 12 million new urban jobs. CPI increase of around 2%. Personal income growth in step with economic growth. A basic equilibrium in the balance of payments. Grain output of around 700 million metric tons. A reduction of around 3.8% in carbon dioxide emissions per unit of GDP. In proposing these targets, we have considered the need to leave some room for structural adjustments, risk prevention, and reform in the opening year of this five-year plan period, so as to lay a solid foundation for delivering better performance in the coming years. The GDP growth target is well aligned with our long-range objectives through the year 2035 and also in line with the long-term growth potential of China's economy. As favorable conditions for achieving these targets are in place, all local governments should, in light of local realities, make solid efforts to deliver good outcomes. In terms of policy orientation, we would like to pursue the group progress while ensuring stability, improve both the quality and performance of growth, boost synergy between adopted policies and new ones, enhance counter and cross-cyclical adjustments, and make macroeconomic governance more effective. We will continue to implement a more proactive fiscal policy. The deficit to GDP ratio for this year is set at around 4%. The government deficit is set at 5.89 trillion yuan. 230 billion yuan more than last year. A total of 1.3 trillion yuan of ultra-long special treasury bonds will be issued to support 2 major strategies and 2 new programs. A total of 300 billion yuan of special treasury bonds will be issued to enable large state-owned commercial banks to replenish their capital. This year, 4.4 trillion yuan of local government special purpose bonds will be issued to support major projects implementation, replenish hidden debts, and also settle overdue payments owed by governments. We will continue to improve spending structure and make that the government spending, fiscal spending, in a better way to use. The central government will increase its fiscal transfer payment to local governments in order to make sure that at the primary level, basic living needs are met, salaries are paid, and governments function normally. And we will further reinforce financial economic discipline, strengthen budget constraints, and strictly control general expenditures. Every cent we save must be spent on solving critical development problems and meeting people's urgent needs. We will continue to apply appropriately accommodative monetary policy. We will maintain adequate liquidity. The increase of aggregate financing and monetary supply in step with projected economic growth and CPI levels. We will develop new and better structural monetary policy instruments, smooth out the channels for monetary policy transmissions, and also get financial institutions to boost support for key priorities such as domestic demand expansion, scientific and technological innovation, macro, small, medium enterprises. We will continue to lower and kept general lower level for the overall financing cost. We will improve coordination between reform measures and macro policies. We will remove the bottleneck and obstacles impeding economic flows through reform and cultivate internal growth momentum. We will enhance the consistency of our macro policy orientation, make such policies more effective. All policies we would like to place and introduced, and they could form the synergy, and we will boost the coordination among different policies. We will refine the mechanism for managing expectations to bolster public confidence. Fourth,
first, build a strong, unified national market and build plans for income increase for both urban and countryside dwellers. And we will also build we will also roll out a number of substantial measures to help farmers to increase their revenues and income. And also we will also allocate 250 billion yuan worth of super long-term national bond to help the enterprises. And we will also allocate 100 billion yuan special fiscal financial coordination fund, and we will make the best use of combined measures such as loan interest subsidies, financing guarantee, and risk compensation. We will broaden the coverage of low interest subsidies for personal consumers and service entities, and we will also revitalize offline consumption and phase out illegitimate barriers for consumption, and we will also introduce for primary and secondary school students in localities where conditions meet the spring and autumn holidays. This year, we have a total of 755 billion yuan earmarked in this year's central government budget for investments, and we will also allocate 800 billion yuan raised from ultra-long special treasury bonds to implement major national strategies and enhance security capacity in key areas. And quotas for local government special purpose bonds earmarked for projects will be raised and placed under separate management, and a total of 800 billion yuan will be allocated from the ultra-long special treasury bonds. This will be driving the vitality of private sector investments. Second, foster new growth drivers at a faster pace. We will upgrade traditional industries, and 200 billion yuan will be raised from ultra-long special treasury to support large-scale equipment upgrades. We will launch a new round of initiatives to drive.
Okay, we're trying to attempt this balancing act between, of course, all the consequential blueprints and the details coming through out of the work report in Beijing, this rally taking place across these markets, and of course developments over in the Middle East. Stocks across the region are bouncing quite sharply today. When you look at the benchmark, you look at Taiwan that's come online this hour. Korea, of course, from the 12% drop yesterday is up substantially. Today we're up 10%. So 3% on both. Some of the big movers in Taiwan, just to underscore that point. Taiwan is up 4, and the big movers are coming up on your screens, and also get you into what we're seeing, of course, in Korea, and very, very substantial rally in buying and volumes into that market. Korea is also a market that is coming off specifically the worst day on record. We're splitting most of the difference, not quite there just yet, but the big names on your screens are up 12%, Samsung and also SK Hynix. That's your market update for now here.
All right, we're just moments away, of course, from hearing a little bit more from Li Qiang and that work report. I will take a bit of step back here and just take a look. Given that this work report was, in some ways released to the public before Li Qiang began speaking, so certainly it's given us time to digest a little bit. Our very own Chief Malaysia correspondent Stephen Engel joins us now from Beijing to kind of look through. Steve, we got things a bit early this time around, but it seems like most of the headlines so far is not too surprising. What stood out to you?
Well, I think it's just the more pragmatic approach that the Chinese leadership is taking. They're not throwing a lot of stimulus at what essentially is a slowdown, obviously a prolonged slowdown, no doubt exacerbated by the ongoing property crisis here. And also just looking at the longer term horizon with them also ratifying the 5-year plan through 2030. They're going to be doing a transitional approach to having more balanced contributions to the economy, including from domestic spending, to increase that from the current 40% upwards towards 50 over the next 5 years. But it's going to be a slow transition to wean yourself off the old cocktail of property investment, manufacturing, and those exports. The record trade imbalance, of course, that China has, a trade surplus, as they shifted that export destinations not necessarily away from the U.S., but diversified to other markets. But they still, of course, after a year of tariffs from the Trump administration, or nearly a year, they had those record exports. So there is a transition period. But there's also the external shocks that could potentially weigh on this economy. So it's not a surprise, because we expected maybe they would take this range of 4.5% to 5% GDP. It gives them a lot of wiggle room if the stresses on the domestic economy and the stresses externally are worse than they had anticipated. And it also lessens the pressure on the provinces to deliver, great growth at a time when their fiscal coffers are still struggling, no doubt. Some of the words from Li Qiang that stuck out to me, because we really want to kind of read how the Chinese leadership is reading what's happening abroad and in the Middle East. He said we need to be clear-eyed about the difficulties and challenges, and he added that multilateralism and free trade are under severe threat. So that really plays into some of the points that I just made. They want to lower expectations. They want to lower some of their expectations on what they can deliver, because of the uncertainties that they have little control over, and that's what's happening in the Middle East. But they have a lot of stakes, of course, with the energy supplies coming from the Middle East. I mean, there's a lot to unpack here. You're absolutely right, though, Yvonne. The numbers that we got are not surprising. They were right in line with what a lot of economists are saying. Now it's time to kind of put some more meaning to those numbers on what Li Qiang is saying, on how the leadership is thinking, because this is really that 1 week where we get to hear directly from them. We're going to get Wang Yi, the foreign minister, in a press conference this coming Sunday. We're also going to get the 5 top economic leaders in a press conference this Friday. And I expect similar themes that they talked about last year. Wang Yi will be a little more strident. Obviously, he's been outspoken on what's happening in the Middle East. But those 5 economic leaders, including, of course, the central bank governor, they were sort of reading from the same page. And they said multiple times last year about belt tightening. Yvonne, Dave?
Yeah, that's actually showed up, Steve, in the form of the numbers that we were largely expecting to come in where they did. To the point you're just making there, Steve, as well, I'm really looking forward to what we're going to get from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. On the eco front, the NDRC has also come out with some lines, Steve, and this is where I want to bring you back in, because when we get them fleshing out how they'll be able to do all of these things, did anything stand out to you, Steve, on 2 areas, the property market and getting the consumption story going?
Yeah, so I don't think there is a big panacea, a big pill that they can take to solve the issues in property. It's a chicken and egg kind of situation. Do you cure the property market to boost confidence and household wealth to thereby boost consumption, or do you get certain incentives out there to households to first build their confidence and spend despite what's happening in the property market? I think the property market obviously has been in a years-long slump, but there might be years more to rectify the situation. That's why the rebalancing push is so much more important, to not necessarily rely on that and that form of investment going forward. So the rebalancing effort over the next 5 years in the 5-year plan is going to be, and Xi Jinping has already mentioned it quite emphatically in 2 speeches in December and also at the Lunar New Year holiday, that they must put much more emphasis on boosting domestic consumption as a ratio of GDP, and rely less on that investment in property and, as I mentioned, exports as well. So I think at that economic leaders meeting on Friday, or the press conference, we're going to get the head of the NDRC, we're going to get the head of the finance ministry, the head of commerce ministry, the central bank governor, and the securities regulator. We'll get a lot more details from them on this, on how the rebalancing away from relying so heavily on property is going to go, especially from the NDRC, the National Development and Reform Commission.
Steve, thank you for that update. Steve, of course, standing by for us there outside. He's in Beijing. Keep warm there, of course, where the weather's actually plummeted just this week.
Snowing, too, yeah.
It's really come down, hasn't it? So has the temperature of these markets in as far as worries around what's happening elsewhere in the world. Let's bring in Mark Cranfield, who's with us right now, our MLive strategist, of course, in Singapore for us. Mark, spend as much time as you want on this first question. Anything that we can glean from the work report in Beijing, then we can move on to other things as well, Mark.
Yeah, I think from investors' point of view, everything is pretty well telegraphed. The fact that you're seeing Chinese equity markets a little bit stronger today is the usual reaction you get when the Prime Minister is speaking. I suspect there's a helping hand there. Maybe the home team is doing a little bit of work to nudge things higher, because nobody's really surprised what they're hearing. There is a positive in the sense that they talked about doing more on the involution side, and the talk about robotics. That certainly is positive for the domestic market. The fact that growth was lowered slightly, that's no surprise to anybody. They were as fully expected. So it's pretty much business as usual, a cautious approach, which people have become used to as far as the Chinese market. Since the end of the COVID period, they've taken a less aggressive approach to stimulating their economy. There was one one-off period a couple of years ago, but apart from that, generally they take a cautious approach, and understandable when you can see the global picture around them. But they will be, investors will be looking for more help on the consumer domestic side to get more spending going there. The most interesting thing today, of course, is the yuan fixing. That is a clear signal from the central bank that even if growth is going to fall slightly, do not take this as a signal you can go shorting the currency. The message is absolutely crystal clear. Very unusual for the dollar yuan fixing to be set below traders' estimates. Traders' estimates generally are not a great signal of where it's going to be. You should probably look at the offshore yuan more than anything. But to have it set 20 pips below is a very aggressive fixing from the PBOC. It's do not mess with the yuan. It is not going to be used in any way to help you out just because growth might be slowing slightly. That's a very clear message today.
Yeah, and I guess really kind of in some ways countering some of the dollar strength we've seen of late too, given the Iran situation. Mark, it's interesting. You mentioned business as usual. Can I say that about Korea now? I mean, I think people are still quite burned after the worst crash on record yesterday. How should I be looking at Korea now?
Look at silver, I would suggest. If you think back to what was going on in the early weeks of the year, we had two clear big macro trades that were going on almost hand in hand. Silver was going through the roof. Korean equities were going up with them. Silver cracked first, and we saw a significant setback for that. It's stabilized a bit in the meantime. But I think that gives you an indication of what to expect as this Korean story is unwinding a bit here. Clearly, the market got way ahead of itself. Certainly that founded on certainly on some good things, in the sense that the spending on AI infrastructure is obviously very strong around the world. It benefits Korean companies. But the fact that the market got so far ahead of any reasonable valuations on a short-term basis clearly is starting to come back and bite people now. Now, the pain and the feeling that people will have in what's happened in the past 22 days, losing 20% or so in a market in a very quick period of time, they're not going to forget that easily. Plus, the margin calls have been dramatic. That would take a lot of people out of the market. So just because we're rebounding today isn't a really clear signal of where we're going for the next couple of weeks. I would suggest that we'll be on a gradual path lower into the month end, particularly as we're coming up to the end of the quarter as well. So for macro traders who've been involved in this, they've also got to take that into account. Where do they want to be positioned? Where are they losing money in other places? And don't forget, this has been a rough week for cross-asset traders. People came in with bond positions around the wrong way, dollar positions around the wrong way, and to some extent equities as well, especially with Korea. So it's been a very painful week if you're a cross-asset trader. So upside here for Korean stocks is probably pretty limited, and we'll probably see them gradually glide lower as we get towards the end of the month.
Mark, well, I think equity markets are somewhat stabilizing today, if not going the opposite way to the upside when you look at some of these things. I can't help but look at the bond markets, and that's still showing a lot of pain coming through. Yields are still up in the Asia Pacific, and I wonder at what point that inflation story will again circle back to equity market and start to bite us back there.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, it's some kind of a contradiction, isn't it? I mean, the bond market seems to be very focused on the elevated oil price. Bonds are behaving almost as though oil prices are going to stay above $80 for some time. They're expecting an extended period of angst in the Middle East, and that's filtering into particularly long end of bond yields. They also would expect higher defense spending, particularly in the United States, as they rebuild ammunition and all they need for the war in Iran. So investors are looking very much at that and the impact on a global basis, and yet equity people seem to be much more optimistic. I think we've talked about this before, that it's so often that the equity market is very short term. People can have a very much a horizon that maybe sometimes just 24, 48 hours, whereas bond markets tend to look at things a little bit longer. Who's right? We'll find out over the next couple of weeks. But also the influence of retail investors as well is much, much bigger in global markets these days, both in Asia and the United States, of course. And retail investors tend to churn things around, again, on short-term horizons. So you can have an impact today, as we're seeing in the morning. Korean stocks having a fantastic morning, could all dissolve in the afternoon as people change their minds. But I'm not sure that equities and bonds are clearly not on the same page. My inclination is that if oil prices are staying up, bond people have got it right, it will be inflationary. That isn't going to help equity markets over the medium term.
Mark, thank you. Mark Cranfield there, our MLS strategist, joining us out of Singapore. Let's bring you back to Beijing there, where the Chinese Premier Li Qiang is still delivering his work report.
The supply of regular senior and secondary school places. Enrollment in quality undergraduate program will continue to expand it. We will also enhance the school capability with distinctive features. We will also to build that system that the schools, society, and families collaboration together. And we will also make sure that the students and young people realize well-rounded development. We will strengthen basic medical and health services. We will deepen the reform of public hospitals to see that they better serve the public interest, and provide greater operational support for county, district, and the community-level medical institutes. And we will also to optimize the position, the function of the medical institute. And we will also continue to ensure better medication continuity at primary-level medical institute. And we will promote preservation, innovative development of TCM. And the government subsidy for basic medical insurance for rural and non-working urban residents will be raised by 24 yuan per person. And we will continue to do the central procurement work. And we will also boost the high-quality development of innovative drugs and medical devices so as to better meet people's diverse needs for medicines and medical services. We will improve social security and social services. Minimum basic old age benefits for rural and non-working urban residents will be raised by 20 yuan per month. And we will continue that the consistency of the social insurance transferring to different locations. We will also boost the development of rural, the elderly care services, and boost development of the silver economy. And we will also carry out a project to boost the rehabilitation service. And for the senior people and also that the people with disabilities, they will receive more support. And we will develop that integrated development of the childcare and the nursing services. We will also to make better use of the resources and also to provide social assistance by tiers and in different categories. We will better meet people's needs in terms of the cultural.
And we will follow the core socialist values in guiding cultural development, and we will develop the press, publishing, radio, film, television, literature, art, and other fields in promoting their production. And we will also encourage museums, public libraries, and cultural centers to open to the public and improve the service system for the public. And we will also develop high-quality cultural tourism and develop an integrated business farm. And we will also develop more popular public sports activities. And 9, accelerating the green transition across the board. We will step up comprehensive efforts to improve the environment, and we will ensure blue skies, clear water, and clean lands. And we will formulate plans to ensure air quality improvements. The natural reserve land will be comprehensively upgraded so as to ensure clear sky and lucid water. And we will also boost the green and low carbon economy. And in major fields, we will roll out green and low carbon development plans, and the national low carbon fund will be established to drive clean energy transition, and we will actively work towards peaking carbon emissions and achieving carbon neutrality. And the system will be rolled out to control both the total amount and intensity of carbon emissions. And the system for managing footprint will be refined, and the new national electric power system will be improved so as to accelerate the construction of smart grid and efficient use of fossil fuels. 10, strengthening risk prevention and mitigation and enhancing security capacity in key areas. We will work to stabilize the real estate market, and city-specific policies will be rolled out to refine supply and boost demand. And we will take measures to engage in reforms of the housing providence and fund system. And we will also launch an action plan to improve property management services. And we will also roll out some additional measures. Efforts will also be taken to diffuse local government debt risks. And this includes diffuse hidden debt risks at a faster pace. And stringent measures will be taken to prevent fraudulent debt resolution. A number of measures will be adopted to diffuse operational debt risks in local government financing platforms. And a long-term mechanism will be established to conduct unified government debt management. We will also take active measures to diffuse financial risks. Local SMEs will be encouraged to get involved in diffusing financial risks, and we will also strengthen early warning and early rectification measures for risks. We will safeguard national security and social stability. We will fully apply a holistic approach to national security and improve the national security governance. And we will strengthen safe production, enhance the foundation of disaster and risk relief. And in northern countries, we will shore up infrastructure and emergency response and other weak links. The social governance system will be improved, and we will support the multi-model dispute handling framework at the local level. And we will also build a greater and safer China. With new circumstances and challenges, higher requirements are posed for the government, and we will have to gain a deeper understanding about the two establishes and remain committed to the four confidences and to do well in terms of two establishes, and we need to stay aligned to the CPC Central Committee with Comrade Xi Jinping at the core, and also we have to shore up the responsibility.
Still with us is Tsinghua University Director and former advisor to the Chinese Central Bank, the PBOC, David Daokui Li, standing by for us still as we, of course, unpack the message coming through out of the Chinese Premier, and we'll be revisiting that, of course, in a couple of minutes. We're still going through the speech there, the work report. Professor Li, thank you so much for standing by, and you've been, of course, familiar with what's been discussed so far there. I guess a lingering question would be just how what seem to be contradictory objectives in terms of getting inflation up and having a consumer that holds up as if prices do go up and that former priority is successful. How do investors need to be looking at that dynamic between China's ability to raise inflation and the Chinese consumer's ability to absorb that inflation?
Well, overall, right now, the Chinese consumers are more able to absorb inflation. Inflation is not a concern for consumers. However, consumers, the big concern is disposable income. And also, surprisingly, the number of holidays, because in China, overall, the households, including labor, are too busy. We are too busy. We don't have time to consume things. I think China overall has much less number of practically in effect holidays, including paid holidays, paid vacations. So in this report, the Premier emphasized that China will increase number of holidays, including more holidays for school kids, so that their parents can also go out with the kids to have vacation to consume. So overall, to answer your question, it is the details of consumer expenditure that matter. Okay, so this report is very pragmatic. It's detailed oriented rather than grandeur, giving you a grandeur and new direction of policy of new policies.
And I guess keeping that budget deficit at 4% of GDP, at a record level, that certainly does mean that the fiscal taps will remain open, David. And really, I think most, as you mentioned earlier in the show, that don't let the softer growth target fool you in some ways, because they are still going to have to stimulate this economy. I mean, what sort of policy measures are you expecting then for this year?
Well, I was expecting a little bit higher target of central government debt. This year's new issuance, planned issuance of new central government debt is just around 6 trillion Chinese yuan, 6 trillion. Last year, I just calculated, 6.2 trillion. Okay, so this year is pretty much at the same level of last year. I was expecting, frankly speaking, a little bit much higher target of new central government debt. However, the Premier said in the beginning of the report that this year's new issuance of long-term government debt is partially meant for local governments to swap out their implicit debt, and also for local governments to pay back delayed payments to local enterprises. I think the policy direction is very good. Okay, that is to let local governments spend more money, to let local government not become a dragging factor of total expenditure of the society. However, I think the total level of central government debt is slightly lower than many people's expectation, including myself. Overall, I think the overall tone of the policy is pragmatic. That is, China recognizes the turbulent times of right now, and China is trying to save some ammunition to deal with even worse scenarios in international economic and geopolitical situation. And also they are aware of the challenges and issues now in the Chinese economy.
Can I just ask then, so we heard some of the targets, of course, in the work report will typically include things like grain production, to the point you're making of being able to ensure that the economy has the things it needs in the event of worst case scenarios. I need to ask you about, do you see any potential short-term impact on supply side inflation because of what's going on outside China? Energy prices are up substantially. Some of the contracts, I just had a glance at, crude prices in Shanghai have gone up 50% over the last few days or so. Is that something I need to be worried about, or can we look through that issue?
There are two things I think we need to watch. By far, the number one factor is crude oil. Okay, after all, the global supply of crude oil most likely will come down. Okay, because even though the OPEC countries have announced to increase their production, still, 20% or even higher percentage of crude oil goes through the Hormuz streets. Okay, Iran is controlling that. Okay, so we are facing a shortage of transportation of crude oil. So most likely, crude oil price will go up. And we're talking about not the futures price, but I'm talking about spot price. And therefore, consumers all over the world, including Chinese consumers, will face a higher crude oil price and refined oil price, refined gasoline price, diesel price. That will translate into higher prices in plastics, in chemical products, in fertilizers, in gasoline, in diesel, in logistics, so on and so forth. So that's by far the number one factor of inflation. Second factor, a smaller magnitude, is corn and soybeans. Okay, because China is reliant upon the foreign supply of corn and soybeans, and corn and soybeans are used in the Chinese economy for animal feeds. Okay, when animal feeds goes up in their price, the price of chicken, the price of pork will go up. So not grain, not our grain, however, is the animal feed. So these are the two factors I think most important for the Chinese economy. So this year we will see for sure a higher pressure of inflation, which to some extent is not too bad a factor. When these prices go up, it will bring up prices of other things. So overall, enterprise profits in China are likely to go up. And in turn, that will increase enterprises to hire and to increase salary, to increase disposable income of consumers.
Li Daokui, we're just weeks away from this meeting between President Trump and Xi. I think most people are hoping that it still is going on. I don't know what you've been hearing. But what do you think the Chinese are going to be asking for this time around, just given the geopolitical situation around Iran? And as you mentioned, the transmission effects from oil prices that could really kind of hurt the economic recovery there.
Well, as of today, if things go on like today's so far, okay, I am optimistic. I still believe the summit meeting will take place, okay? And in terms of what China will request, I think two things. Number one, Number one, China requests that the trade I think conflicts or trade clash will not escalate between the two countries. Instead, the U.S. side should show some goodwill, good attitude towards resolving or toning down trade frictions between the two countries. Okay. Number two, I think more important is the Chinese side needs the U.S. the White House to make some positive statements about the Taiwan streets. Okay, Taiwan issue. Okay, to make whatever statements that the U.S. side should come up with. Okay, because that's by far the biggest concern of China, even higher concern than trade, even higher concern than any short-term issues.
All right, David, we got to leave it there, but thank you so much. David Daokui Li, their former PBOC advisor and director at Tsinghua University. He's been here throughout the entire show here this morning, really kind of deciphering and going through what we've been hearing from that work report and what to expect in just a few weeks between that meeting between Presidents Trump and Xi. We have another big guest coming up here as well. Tomorrow we'll be speaking with the PBOC advisor and Peking University School of Development Dean Huang Yiping as we get more details on, of course, NPC and the economy. Huang Yiping joining us there tomorrow.
Right. Just in terms of market reaction, the lack of it, or where it's most pronounced, some of the NDRC lines that have come through separately, of course, to the work report that also came out too. And some of the market reactions, as you can see on your screens, right? There we go. So everything from biotech to AI and robotics have been underscored as still key, extremely important priorities of the government in as far as support and developments are concerned. The broader read across these markets is because we're seeing that, then we are seeing the Hang Seng Index also joining this rally. We are seeing across the region, underperforming slightly, but that's just to say, of course, given the day that we had yesterday in Korea, it's understandable that we are getting a bigger move higher in some of the more stocks that have seen more damage recently. Korea is coming up on your screens, and I think we're now up 11% on that benchmark itself. So we did touch about 8% higher from highs. It's very weird for me to say that we're coming off highs to just 8%. We're now splitting the difference, 10.5% there. Jakarta coming online, and some of the stocks there, of course, coming up on your screens. And just very quickly, of course, and hopefully this next support level holds, we'll show you. So far, we declined in November. We touched that level. We did manage to, again, see that bounce off that 100-day moving average. Charts coming up, guys. Thank you. On MSCI All Country Index, and does that remain the case in terms of strong support? Commodity prices, though, are still moving to the upside, which means we're not done with this issue just yet. In fact, we're not trading at 84 right now in Brent. As you can see, this recent pickup in commodity price, when I say recent, the last few hours or so, it's I wouldn't say kicking off, but it's really underscoring the point that this problem is not going away. 13% now on delivered prices, of course, in Shanghai. Plenty more ahead. This is Bloomberg. Right. Just an update here. Our other top story, of course, remains the ongoing developments in the Middle East. And we're not hearing some reports here that Iran has launched new missiles and drones at U.S. and Israeli targets. That's what we know so far in terms of just the markets have not forgotten about the story by the very least. Of course, when you look at what we're seeing as far as crude prices are concerned, we're now, in fact, okay, there we go. Yeah, okay, I'm looking at an energy board right now, and we are tacking on those gains right now as far as crude prices are concerned. 3.5% on U.S. crude right now.
Yep, and we are getting back closer to Brent markets at, what, $84? At one point, we did kind of spike to 85 in just this week. So it seems like, as Dave mentioned, we are seeing parts of the equity market recover, but this is the space where you're still seeing quite a lot of that risk premium still put into these markets. President Trump, meanwhile, has expressed confidence in the U.S. military campaign in Iran, even as a timeline for for operations and its ultimate goals remain unclear. Let's bring in our Bloomberg Politics editor, Laura Davison. There's so many ways to kind of track this right now, but what's the latest that your team is watching out for?
So we're essentially kind of in this scenario where you've got a tit for tat. There are strikes going both sides almost every day. It almost keeps it hard to keep track of what's happening kind of on the airstrikes. We did see a couple different developments, particularly in the sinking of an Iranian naval ship by a U.S. submarine off in the Indian Ocean. It was there for a sort of a naval show with a bunch of different militaries, sort of essentially a friendly event. So this has caused kind of a lot of concern, just about the U.S.'s capability and where they'll go to attack Iran, very, very far from Tehran there. This, it was sort of a sign of, markets certainly reacted to this. We saw, just generally kind of as this may be more prolonged, everyone's digging in deeper. There was sort of on the flip side, a positive report, at least markets interpreted it from the New York Times yesterday, that Iranian intelligence had reached out through an intermediary to the U.S. looking to sort of restart talks. The Iranian officials later shot that down metaphorically. So unclear, exactly what sort of diplomatic channels are open, if at all. The public posture has been no talks from the Iranians. Trump, until about a day or two ago, had said he would be open to talks, but now is saying that time has passed. We heard from Pete Hegseth, the defense secretary, that this could be going on for 4, 6, 8 weeks. Really, no one is willing to commit to a timeline at this point.
What do we know about, and just to pivot to this other aspect, of course, which is stranded citizens or stranded passengers, just more broadly as well. What do we know about that separate operation there?
Yeah, so there's been a bunch of different flights, U.S. charter flights, that have gone into the region to get folks out. Almost 18,000 people have been evacuated either through those or through commercial means. But this really has been a political touch point here and really caused a lot of anger for U.S. citizens in the region, because they were not told that they needed to evacuate until after the war had begun. By that point, airspaces were closed. Yeah. They were then told you should evacuate via commercial means. For a lot of people, that wasn't an option. And then the U.S. government came in and sent flights. So this has really kind of served, well, sort of a minor point of what is a much bigger conflict. Just a sort of a signal that there may not necessarily be the planning and the foresight that people are hoping from the U.S. government in terms of, what's the strategy here.
Laura, thank you so much for the update. Laura Davison there, our Bloomberg Politics editor here. For more on what's taking place in terms of the Iran war, subscribers can read our big take piece today. Of course, Trump is shifting strategies, risking this chaotic global endgame. Check that out. NI Big Take, NI Space Big Take specifically on your Bloomberg terminal. Right, so welcome back. We're about going into the first hour of the cash markets this Thursday, and as you can see, of course, Chinese benchmarks are joining this rally, not to the extent elsewhere, but it's still a decent bounce, especially on the CSI and the Hang Seng Index, as you can see, though. Yeah, joining in on this sort of regional sort of recovery, as Dave has talked about here. Obviously, Korea has leading that charge here today, but, is the coast really clear? As Mark Cranfield told us, take a look at what silver markets have been doing after that crash. Just goes to show we might not be out of the woods just yet when it comes to the volatility around Korea and some of these, markets like Taiwan that really have been quite heated there of late. U.S. futures are there. Also, European futures have turned into more of the negative side of things here, so that's certainly one to watch as U.S. markets wake up there. 11:29 a.m. in Tokyo. Japanese markets are heading to that lunch break in just a moment. And yeah, we are continuing to see a bit of a recovery there when it comes to the Nikkei 225. We're up more than 2.5%. Same goes for the topics here this morning. There is that strength slightly coming back into the Japanese currency. But as we've been talking about when it comes to the safe haven flows, the dollar has been quite predominant in the last few sessions. Now we're taking a little bit of a breather when it comes to the greenback here this morning. But yields continue across the region. And of course, when it comes to global bond markets, quite elevated. We're up 3 basis points for your Japanese 10-year yield. Yeah, and the bond market's pain point, look at Korea coming up now, and as we transition there, it's really this change in the narrative from higher inflation prices to what that means for central banks. And I think you've really seen a very clean and clear shift in Europe, which is a very good example where gas prices are on the way up, because this time last week, markets were pricing in the next move to be a cut. It's now clearly a hike. from the ECB. Now, not the full hike, but it's really shifted the expectations for rate direction moving forward. Korea is also interesting because I think Mark Cranfield early on made a very good point, right? The starting point for markets coming into this week where things were just not positioned for the stuff that we saw. So whether that was Korea, whether that's this, why did the dollar suddenly come back as a haven play? Why wasn't gold moving up substantially higher? It's interesting given, of course, our starting points. And in Korea's case, of course, which is a market up, I'm just going to make up a number, 50% year to date. And I'm sure I'm not far off as far as that.
No.
That's not even an exaggeration. That market's gone up quite substantially.
Yeah, and we're still up, right? If you think about it, right?
Yes.
You're burned, but not as burned as
burned out, yeah.
as yesterday suggests, right? So certainly there's a lot of questions about, is this sort of the turning point in this market where, where things just a little bit too overheated to a point where now we can be a little bit more selective? Is now opportunity, is there value that's emerging now? Here to join us a little bit more as our next guest, Sean Taylor, CIO and Portfolio Manager at Matthews Asia. Sean, I'm wondering how you're assessing all this here right now and really what we've learned in terms of markets this past week. What is the right appropriate playbook now? Do I have to go back to maybe 2022, when Russia invaded, Ukraine and around that time to kind of interpret the price action that we're seeing, or is this all kind of overdone in your eyes?
No, I think there's a serious situation out there that could cut off all supply in the short term, and that's obviously worrying markets. So to me, the key risk indicators is watching where the oil price goes and also the strength of the dollar. We have had, Yvonne, over the last few sessions, coming back a bit today, a lot of volatility in markets like Korea, in areas which I think were probably overbought in the short term and had a lot of leverage. So I think you've seen that severe move down in Korea, which looks like almost like a blip in the run of Korea over the last 12 months and year to date, and really driven by leverage. And interestingly, people have been buying into it. So people still believe the story is strong, but we do have to watch in the short term the oil price.
Would you have bought that dip in Korea? Would you still be buying this dip? I mean, certainly you are in New York, and we really did see that those flows coming back in after that just terrible day that Korea had on Wednesday.
We've been pretty cautious on doing anything in this volatility. Just wait and see is the answer. We like Korea. We're positioned there. We obviously, took a bit of a hit over the last couple of days, but on a year-to-date basis, it's been one of our most positive markets. And we don't believe anything that's happened in this volatility, David, has affected the fundamentals. So, a lot of Korea has been driven by the semiconductors. They still have very good earnings growth. We have a much wider exposure to Korea. We like the industrial space, which got hit and now is picking up today. And we also like the value up story. So there's sort of three angles of Korea. It's cheap, and we are also seeing that retail investors who have record levels of investment in the US, in Korean retail investors, are beginning to buy their own market. And just to give you a number, Korean retail investors bought over $30 billion of US equities last year, having bought only 10 the year before. We're beginning to see that come back as the value proposition in Korea appears.
We were just talking to our colleague about, it's difficult to be a cross-asset sort of trader now. When I see stocks and bonds are falling in tandem, even gold's not reacting the way that it has, in the face of all these geopolitics. How do you look at some of the correlations that we're seeing across these markets here right now? And where is sort of that sort of safe place to park now?
Well, I think a lot of it, Yvonne, is to do with positioning. And your safe place to park in a very short term is something that's underperformed. So maybe some of the large caps in China or in India or in ASEAN, and also has some yield protection. I'm talking from an Asian emerging market perspective here.
Right.
And, also currencies that had sold off, like the dollar. But I think ultimately, and that's a worrying fact, it just means there's more uncertainty. So a lot of it's positioning. I mean, we had cyclical sell-off and an AI sell-off at the same time. So, a lot of the commodity stocks have been down across emerging markets. They're all up quite strongly today in the UK and US session. One thing that's worrying is we've had this equity pickup now and the oil price hasn't gone down. So, normally that correlation would happen. So I just think it's a positioning over the next few days and should revert back once we know really where fundamentals are. No one likes uncertainty. This is an uncertain period. I mean, at the bottom line, we don't know what the next administration will look like in Iran. And that's a big question out there that no one seems to be answering. And I think the closer we get to that, then the volatility will calm down.
Well, the optimist in me, so if we assume and hope that the war is far more transient than it looks to be, so assuming that goes away, we're left with, to your point, private equity, private credit issues. There's the AI story that continues to hit several sectors. And then if you peel that back, the ultra optimist in me then sees valuations at still very expensive levels. What's the appetite for equities given all of that? And I know it's very strange to ask an equities guy that question, but what's your take from your perch?
Well, I think the reason why the US hasn't fallen as much recently is it didn't perform. So it's really been the hottest areas of the market that have come down. I think that if everything calms down and the oil price isn't too high, so calms down from here or stays at this level for a while, I think it won't affect the overall economic environment as much as the market's reacted the last couple of days. Yeah, US debt is a worry in terms of the level of government debt, but the household in the US is strong and the balance sheet of corporates is strong. And, at the moment, I think the market is looking at things like AI and say, actually, the CapEx is there. Short term, it's just a bit overdone. Software underperformed, semis outperformed, and the positioning is very, very extreme at both of those, overweight semis and underweight software. So there's a little bit of rebalancing there. I think in the last 6 weeks, the whole talk is about diversification and more people putting money internationally, and that probably got to a bit too extreme. I think there were something like $60 billion into emerging markets this year, having had not really had flows in for many years. So maybe things just went a bit too quickly in that direction, and we're just having a little pause in that. And then from an Asian perspective, I think growth is still there. We still have the possibility for rates to come down. And we are seeing, markets like Korea looking very attractive on a valuation basis as long as earnings hold.
John, obviously what has been a big sort of event in China this week is the MPC. Well, perhaps, we've been talking too much about Iran. So far, the headlines don't suggest that there's been that much of a market response. I'm just wondering, a softer growth target, fiscal, seems to be still intact in some ways. But anything that we can glean from a market perspective from this MPC?
I think, Yvonne, when we have an MPC which has been followed by the 5-year plan, it's really about detail. And so I don't think there's anything new there. I don't think the market expected anything new. I think a lot of China's equity market was repriced last year. I think we've talked about this before. We had the DeepSeek moment, the private sector getting back in favor with the government, and then better relations between President Xi and President Trump, plus good cash flows and cheap valuations at the beginning of 25. And now we've sort of had a pause in the last quarter in China. It's been much more selective. We've seen underperformance from the larger caps, the e-commerce plays. We've seen a lot of money come out from the government. The government's reckoned to have taken maybe 90 billion out of the equity market in the A share, and that's probably dampened things down and gives them some ammunition to buy it back later. On the other hand, we've seen good news in the Hong Kong exchange. We've had lots of IPOs. The pipeline's very strong. Some good quality companies coming out. So I still think it's positive for China. What's happening in the capital markets, even though the economy is a little bit damp. But I think people are more selective.
Sean, thank you, by the way, for staying up late. I know it's getting late where you are in New York, so we truly appreciate it. Sean Taylor, the CIO, portfolio manager at Matthews Asia. Coming up, we'll just, in fact, continue the conversation there, Korea specifically, with CLSA joining us on really their take on just what happened And that question is for yesterday and also what's happening today. This is Bloomberg. Right, welcome back. We're up 10%, 11% today in Korea, gap higher. We were down 19.5% from Thursday, just to underscore the roller coaster of a ride this equity market's been. Joining us now to talk us through what happened and what you do from here, very simply, Jongmin Shim, Deputy Head of Korea Research at CLSA. Jongmin, I mean, for the longest time, we were looking for an opportunity to not talk about Korea because it was the market that people were talking about day in and day out. The war happened and this thing in the Middle East, of course, things really, really kicked off. And finally, in my head, I was like, okay, finally, something else apart from Korea. And then Korea happened because of perhaps what's going on in the Middle East. Where's your head at right now, given where the market where you are?
Yeah, so the foreign investors were a little worried on what's been happening in Korea. It's just purely on a price action perspective because the valuation itself was not that stretched in my view because the earnings, consensus earnings was actually going up quite steeply on back of the semiconductor sector. But then, the market itself was up like 50% up until end of February. So the foreign investors were tempted to sell, and then the retail investors were crowding up on their positions, especially on the maybe leverage trades for some of them, which I think got wiped out yesterday. And foreigners were also taking profit because they were still up quite a bit, even until the end of yesterday too. Then I think now the market's kind of coming back up where the fundamentals are still resilient. If the war ends sometime soon, then it probably won't have a big macro impact on the overall global economy as well as Korea too. So then I think today's price action coming back up could be justified, in my view.
Okay. Was this? I mean, you mentioned the war. I mean, do you think it was solely the war that kind of became the perfect excuse for people to sell? And, I'm just going to want to gauge this unwind of some of these very crowded trades. When you take a look at the semi stocks, for example, have we seen the worst of it?
I think in the near term, we probably have seen the worst of it because, for instance, when the Russia-Ukraine war, broke out, the max drawdown from that moment until the bottom of the market was around 20%. And actually, up until yesterday, in just a few trading days, we have already seen that drawdown happening. So I think the market was already, much of it was factored into the price already. But then it's very difficult for the investors to actually act on it because the price action was so volatile. Yesterday was the worst performing day of Kospi since its inception in 1980. So I think it's very difficult for investors to do anything at the moment. But I would take it as a buying opportunity rather than selling out and think that Korea is going to start rolling over at this point of time.
Okay, that's a good point to make. So buy this dip. People were waiting for a dip to buy. How much of what happened and will likely happen is down to market mechanics and the piping, right? So this market has a lot of options and ETF products tied to it. In fact, some even bigger than the market. And I wonder whether that exacerbated the moves and whether that, from a regulatory perspective, do you think regulatory risk, because I can't imagine regulators being happy to see their market go up 10% one day, 10% down another.
Yeah, sure. So I think to some extent it was driven by the leverage products and also the retail investors, because actually the margin lending of most of the major brokers were maxed out because, the index have gone up so much and retail investor participation have gone up as well. So I was hearing that single stock future volume was also increasing, so that maybe that also had a negative impact on the way down. So on the way up and down, it's so volatile. So it's something that I also think that the regulators and the government will probably not want to see. So maybe this could be addressed sometime later. And if this happens once again, probably the government will, come up with a measure on this.
Jongmin, it's great to have you. Thanks for giving us a bit more insight really on what's really going on the ground there. Jongmin Shim, a deputy head of Korea research at CLSA. And we'll have much more market analysis coming up here. Gamma Asset Management, they're going to be talking a bit more about what to do with markets. Also, Fidelity's Pei-Chen Liu is going to be joining us to kind of digest and analyze a little bit more what we got from that work report from Li Qiang as well. That's just ahead on Insight with Haslina Amin. Well, Goldman Sachs' CEO David Solomon says the initial market reaction to the yuan roar has been relatively benign. Now, speaking to us exclusively at the bank's Australia Week event, Solomon said that investors are awaiting more information on the direction and duration of the Iran conflict.
I don't see complacency. I think there's a lot of uncertainty around the direction of the conflict, how it'll be resolved, what the off-ramps are. And, I think it's fair to say when you look at markets, market reactions have been relatively benign. And I certainly could have seen over the last couple of days, a little bit more volatility. But I don't think people are being complacent. I think that market participants are looking and trying to say, how is this going to play out? What's the end game? You can see, good scenarios and more difficult scenarios. And as they have more information in the coming days, the coming week or two, I think that will have an impact on risk premiums. I think at the moment what market participants are really looking at is this going to translate through to things that affect economic growth and activity, particularly energy supply chains? So far, I think one of the reasons why markets are reacting the way they are is they're encouraged that there is strong support for trying to ensure that doesn't happen, but it's uncertain. You don't know. And we'll see. In the long run for portfolio allocation, and I know Peter Oppenheimer, Sharmeen Mossavar-Ramari, they did a call for our wealth clients. If you have portfolio allocation, there's nobody that's saying you should change your fundamental portfolio allocation because of what's going on. But for traders and day-to-day market participants that think about risk premia, every single day, obviously they're watching very closely.
What about the people that run big, major global banks like yours, right? Do you worry about the lack of predictability when it comes to policy, when it comes to how this potentially ends and when it ends? What's going on with your Middle East operations, for example?
I worry about a lot of things. We run a big global business. We have an extraordinary team. And, I think one of the things that we have to accept is the world is a very complicated place. There's always a lot of uncertainty. There's always a lot of nuance. But we have, base beliefs on how economies will perform, how the world will evolve. And, we operate around that, but we always are prepared to risk manage and think about downside risks. And I think one of the things you have to do when you run a big, large financial institution is that when, facts change or risks come up, you've always got to be prepared to pivot, to shift, to de-risk. And, we run our business, that way always. We run a big balance sheet, and we think about that every day. But there's nothing, while these are very, very significant events, and I don't want to diminish them in any stretch, we've operated the firm through lots of very significant events year in, year out, and that's part of what we do.
Is it business as normal then for, say, your offices in Saudi Arabia? Is there still travel going on? What's the communication being with clients?
That is complex. We've got a significant number of people in those Middle East countries, and obviously, first and foremost, we're concerned with their safety. And we're trying to do everything we can to support them and their families. I would not say, it's business as usual in those markets. All those markets for all businesses, are operating work from home and stay safe as a first priority. And so we'll just have to watch closely, how things play out. And, we're very, very focused on making sure our people and their families are safe and sound. And at the moment, that's our primary focus in that part of the world.
Do you think there is a bit of an existential cloud over Dubai as a financial center now?
Well, I do think safety and security, matters. And I wouldn't say, I think it's a little bit premature to talk about existential clouds. But, if you're living and operating in a place and you didn't anticipate this, it's quite scary and it's quite unsettling. And so, as I said, our primary focus is on the safety and security of our people there. And we're working very hard to make sure that we're protecting them and their families.
And that was Goldman Sachs' chairman and CEO David Solomon speaking exclusively to Heidi in Sydney. So, it's been a busy day. Obviously, we've been tracking this rebound that we're seeing across equity markets, but really the MBC was certainly front and center. And obviously, it's as expected, right? When you talk about a softer growth target of 4.5% to 5%. Fiscal, side of things seems to be still at record levels at 4% of GDP. So, it's not like markets really reacted too aggressively towards it, but there are some things in terms of the nuances of what we can kind of glean from it. The focus on innovation, AI, robotics and biotech. I mean, these really hot sectors seem to be reacting quite positively to it.
Yeah, and the fact that, some of the announcements were actually that was front loaded in terms of the news flow really, I guess, underscores the change of the tone, right?
Yeah.
David Daokui Li, who joined us early on, said, fine, we have the numbers, but focus on the tone. It's positive. There's a recognition of the current challenges. And yes, it's a pragmatic work report is how he described that taking place. But yeah, as Yvonne is pointing out, right, we did get a surprise move across some of these, across some of the sectors involved. Robotics, I think, are coming up on your screens. Chip stocks are also seeing a decent bounce today, too.
Yeah, so are we going to see more dancing humanoid robots? That certainly is going to be one thing to watch here.
I'm waiting for a singing one. A really, really good singing one.
Oh, okay.
But I don't think that has anything to do with dynamics of engineering.
Exactly. They have to move, right?
Yes.
Anyways, but that's one thing that we're watching out for. Also, when it comes to kind of chip stocks overall, have been doing quite well here. Of course, there has been that push when it comes to R&D and the like here. So the policy support certainly is helping a lot of these chip names here today. Watching Thailand markets, given the sell-off that we saw yesterday, I mean, at one point we're down some 8%, so certainly we'll see if they join the fray here in this recovery. India markets, obviously one to watch as well. That's it for us here on The China Show.